top were the German fortress positions, and the ease with which the Germans were able to pick off these forces as they landed, because it was simply quite an impossible task to arrive here at dawn on D-Day and then be seen to take on the might of the German army, who basically were in a position where they could defend this coastline with all of their huge armaments. And it is a tribute, obviously, to these many thousands of men who landed on the beach on that day and who saw so many of their comrades fall in the water and on the beach, that these men that we're watching now managed to get through.
I think the third band is coming on now, the band of the Royal Artillery, playing a song called Arromanches, written to commemorate the building of the Mulberry and the storming of Gull Beach, written by A.E. Kelly. It's a tune we should hear several times as we wait for the various dignitaries to arrive. It'll be followed by Glorious Victory by Kendal. Well, they look pretty good to me. Let's just hope if we get to that age, we can still walk with a back as straight as that, staring straight ahead. A lot of them are very fit. We have an entire medical unit out of sight, tucked away here. Luckily, so far, don't look like they've been needed, nor does it look like they will be needed. These men wanted very much to be here, and at last they're walking in pride. This, the biggest of the whole week's events, as far as the British are concerned. As this goes on, the Americans are making their way to Omaha Cemetery, where 9,000 of their young men are buried.
Alistair Bruce in London, Tim was talking about the amazing physical condition of these men. Some of them in their 80s and still capable to march along Gold Beach at Arromanches today in the peak of condition.
Well, they certainly look that. I must say, hearing Tim, I'm sure he'd be able to tell us more about this, but looking at the scenes we're seeing, I'm tremendously pleased to see the way they're all being carefully looked after by today's soldiers. And I hope that they're doing it remarkably well. I have seen the senior Sergeant Major of the British Army, the Academy Sergeant Major from Sandhurst, wandering around with his pace stick under his arm and his slashed peak across his nose, presumably shouting out a few clear and clipped instructions to these noble men. And I hope that he has remembered with dignity to record quite who he's talking to and has controlled himself a little more than they used to at me in my day.
It is at times like this that we remember the scenes on the longest day when the Scots regiments landed and were led from the ocean itself by the piper.
It's certainly a brave thing to do. The pipers always in the Scottish regiments have their role to perform in battle. They have the medical kit, and that's the vital thing to see when you're wounded. But the pipes always swirl up the most wonderful enthusiasm and adrenaline in the Scots, and there's no doubt about it that I think when the Germans heard the pipes coming, they probably were afeared to their very knees.
Well, perhaps we'll hear the pipes later today. We'll come back to you in a moment, Tim. I just want to bring in Simon McCoy for a moment, because we haven't seen the Queen as yet, and again, all of today's arrangements are obviously behind schedule. Is there a big problem at this stage, Simon, do you think, or not?
I think they'll be getting near to that stage. She's scheduled to arrive at Arromanches at 5 o'clock local time. Well, that's 45 minutes from now. She has to travel by helicopter, and she'll be meeting there the Prince of Wales, the Princess Royal, Princess Margaret, the Duke of Gloucester and the Duke of Kent. So there will have to be a cut-off point at which she will have to be advised that, look, we've got to go. We are due at Arromanches. It is the British commemorative parade.
Simon, they've built in something for that. And we are getting near to that stage. President Meeter, I understand, is still talking at Omaha Beach, and I suspect those around her are going to be getting a bit quivery at this moment. Well, when she turns up, that's where she'll be sitting. Simon, I'm sorry to interrupt you, just breaking in. Yeah, they've built in a 10-minute barrier where she was going to go to a chateau for tea. Now, as you say, it's running over at Omaha slightly, so if they can get her onto a helicopter and bring her here, they will probably do without the tea break for her, and she'll be helicoptered onto a hill just overlooking the beach, and instead of going off to the chateau, she'll be driven straight down onto the beach. We were forcefully told by a very senior army man the other day that it's very much in her mind and in everybody's mind not to leave these gentlemen on the beach for too long in this wind, and a fairly chill wind it is. Because if they're enjoying themselves, as I said, they've been wanting to be here a long time. Going back to what Alistair was saying about whether the soldiers respect these men, well, as he knows, absolutely they do. They've been, the young serving soldiers look up to these men. They know what they went through, and they know what they had to do. And we were in a bar. I keep saying we're in a bar. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but just popped in for a quick cup of coffee a few hours ago, and the sound of singing was coming out from one of the seafront bars, and the vets were there teaching some of the younger men some of the old marching songs.
We're looking at some of the French women there. I mean, we've heard the veterans' accounts of getting onto the beaches, then going inland and being embraced by the French women. I suppose that was the good side to everything after the hell that they went through, Alistair.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I mean, I think that I don't know whether there are some 49-and-a-quarter-year-olds wandering around watching this today, but I think that undoubtedly the immense delight that the French must have felt, despite the fact that I'm afraid there was, of necessity, the need to bombard so heavily the coastline, and many French civilians were killed. And as I was saying earlier on today, my father was in HMS Ramillies just off Sword Beach, and was required to bring down a fire control on Caen because there were such tremendous problems dealing with the defences there. And when asked what the fire control should be, he just plotted out the word Ramillies across Caen and gave the coordinates to the gunners, and off they went. But I mean, it had to be done. It was the most ghastly task for any of the servicemen to do, to actually bomb our allies, but that was the only way we could reach the Germans and to lower the morale, and therefore make sure that the whole of Europe was freed, even though we had to, I'm afraid, sacrifice many of those who were on these beaches.
As we watch their faces, and we take in British veterans here gathered on Gold Beach at Arromanches, it's timely to remember the journey across the Channel, the dreadful journey. They'd been in these troop carriers for hours, and then they were transported across the Channel in dreadful conditions, in 18-knot winds, high seas, and then, as I said before, they were required to fight at the end of it.
As you were saying that, we were looking at a picture of a gentleman in battle dress from the time, and that was about all they had, this sort of very straightforward khaki battle dress. And they must have indeed got extremely cold wearing it. And as we were saying earlier on, it must have lowered morale. But clearly morale is completely intact. If Tim's stories of trips to the bars today, I'm just hoping Tim might give us a rendition of one of the songs.
I don't need to do that, Alistair. We'll shortly be hearing the good old songs like I'll be hanging out the washing on the Siegfried line, if the Siegfried line's still there. You can't tempt me into singing that. They are getting a bit worried about the feet, as you can see there. It's rather wet, and also the longer this goes on, the more the tide comes in. Now, they've got their feet wet 50 years ago as they came out of the landing crafts, and they don't really want to do it again. But this should go according to plan. They should start to speed things up, and I can't see the tide coming in and washing over them.
Of course, you were talking about the tide there, Tim, and that was one of the crucial factors in making the decision that D-Day took place on the 6th of June, wasn't it, Alice?
Absolutely, yes, indeed. Sorry, I was just noticing some of these wonderful medals. I mean, I've seen DSOs, I've seen MCs, I've seen military medals. I mean, these guys are excellently decorated, and of course they've also got the France and Germany star, which joins them together as a band of tremendous fellows.
Alistair, when you look at the faces of these veterans and compare it to the young soldiers, as you say, just out of Sandhurst, it must, when they look at them, it must really take them back to the ages that they were when they were landing.
I know, and I'm sure that for many of them, their sons and maybe their grandsons have joined the forces. And, you know, what thoughts they must have for them if their sons or grandsons are going off into, say, Bosnia or something, and they see the pink-faced youth and hope that they once were setting off into a dangerous environment. Yes, they must be tremendously moved, and, you know...
It's funny you should say that. The members of the Royal Logistic Corps on the beach there, the serving members, And you'll see the chap who actually opens the car door for the Queen. He's part of the Royal Logistic Corps. They indeed are on their way to Bosnia on October the 1st. They're heading down into Split in Croatia first and then going on from there to Bosnia. Princess Anne is actually their Colonel-in-Chief. She's going to be down here. And they may well be getting a few lessons about, you know, keeping it all together, keeping the team spirit up when you're in very, very difficult conditions. Bosnia not quite comparing to this, but of course it is indeed a very dangerous place. Also on that, there's been several battlefield tours. For example, last night after the parachute drop, the veterans escorted members of the parachute regiment, young 21-year-old guys, around the battlefields, and the idea was that they could educate them and give them some pointers as to what things could be like. And on the point of education, young French children and indeed school parties from Britain have been across, also guided round by veterans and also by serving soldiers. And the theme of this is both thank you for 1944, welcome in 1994, and we do not forget.
If I can say something at this point about standards, colours and flags, the military attitude to standards is very significant. Going right back to the days of the Roman centurions, they used to gather around their standard, and it represented the morale and the soul of the regiment. And in so doing, it also represented the fallen. And it was therefore, while being a focus for gathering around and defending, it was the means of holding that family sense, that sense of belonging, and seeing all these flags, standards, and colours on parade today, it does tremendously focus the mind that although the fallen are absent, they are represented by these colours and flags, and their souls are very much present on this square, on this beach, where they lost their lives.
A reminder that here on Gold Beach, the first ashore were the 1st Battalion of the Hampshires, part of the 231st Brigade, preceded by specialised tanks. The main aim at this most westerly beach in the British and Canadian sector was to seize Bayeux, block the main Bayeux-Caen road to any German tanks heading for the American beaches, and link up with the Americans at Port-en-Bassin.
You can see here, Michael, that they haven't lost, excuse me, going back to the pictures here, they haven't lost that discipline. They were just being asked to, well, they were being ordered to form up there. And as a man, they turned as one into the left turn, and then they're doing the arm's length distance between each man to try and get themselves into the exact order. They're going to be in blocks of 500 in an open-ended square. You can see that's just formed up there. And the Queen will come down in a Range Rover and be driven round them to tour them, and then she'll be driven up to the dais. Great rapport down there on the beach between the current soldiers and the veterans. They've been cracking jokes, laughing and joking as they were forming up. But now things are getting a bit more serious, and of course the entire event will begin shortly. In the background there, behind the veterans, you can see members of the Royal Army Medical Corps. They're just on standby. We have to accept that perhaps 1 or 2 people will fall ill during this, not only because the emotional, not trauma, but difficulty some of them may suffer as they think back, but also standing on that beach for over an hour is not always an easy thing to do, so the RAMC there just in case. Great comradeship between these gentlemen. They've had a great old time. Sometimes they don't see each other from year to year. They just come together on the 6th of June, and then they swap all the memories. I was saying earlier, these are friendships 50 years old now. Well, perhaps more. Some of these men came together in 41, 42, and then they were tempered by the steel of battle as they fought on D-Day and came through on the Normandy campaign. And they survived it, and their friendship strengthened by the fact that the knowledge that their friends didn't make it. And they chat to each other here about the old times and about the friends they lost. They go to the cemeteries in groups of 2 and 3. They've come here en masse, each one with their own individual memory, and they share a joy of their togetherness. They really enjoy being together. Some of them come year after year, so they go to the same hotel, they go to the same restaurant. They know the restaurant owner, the hotel owner by their first name. As you can see there, an army officer having a chat, bit of a joke with them. They also share an awful lot of medals. You can see that. You get medals for being part of the Normandy campaign. You get a medal for being a national serviceman, but there's too many medals on these chests for it just to be that. These are men who've been through something and have come through the other side, and they celebrate their 50 years of life.
As we watch the former paras and the Marines And we can take in all of those medals. It's difficult, certainly, to comprehend the amount of medals there, and of course what these men performed on the beaches when they landed on D-Day. We'll be coming back to all of that in just a moment.
Tell me.
You join us now live from Normandy on Gold Beach at Arromanches, the location of the Mulberry Harbours, which were built to load all of the extra backup that these troops needed after they landed on D-Day. We've seen the most amazing display by British veterans carrying their colours. We've seen Marines, we've seen paratroopers, we've seen the most amazing display of medals, reminding us of the number of decorations and the number of brave men that have turned out here, many of them in their 80s, to commemorate what happened on D-Day 50 years ago. In Normandy now, at Arromanches, Tim Marshall. Tim?
Thank you, Michael. This, we think, is the last block of 500 veterans to come on. They're due to all be forming this open-ended square by 25 minutes past the hour. And this is now going, as you might expect, with military precision. Prince Charles is just arriving, accompanied by General Michael Jackson to his right. He's the commander of UK 3rd Division. Prince Charles, of course, Colonel-in-Chief of the Parachute Regiment, whose band is playing above up on the seawall. Simon.
Yes, Prince Charles flew into Normandy yesterday, actually. He's just been in Czechoslovakia for... Yes, Prince Charles arrived from Czechoslovakia yesterday, where he's been meeting Czech air servicemen who played an important role in the D-Day landings, often unsung, but the Prince very keen to see as many people involved in these landings as possible, as indeed was the Queen. That is why you see so many members of her family here today. And this really the pinnacle, if you like, of the royal family's appearance over this D-Day weekend. You see the Princess Royal, Duke of York, and Princess Margaret has just come into picture with Tim Lawrence at her right side, the Princess Royal's husband, who incidentally works at the Ministry of Defence in their Naval Department, has a senior position there, working with an advice team for Malcolm Rivkin, the Secretary of State for Defence.
Simon, the security arrangements for this must have been horrendous.
Absolutely, and a headache for the French because they have to oversee security on this occasion, but obviously the President of the United States has his own security team. Then you have the Royal Protection Squad who are looking after British members of the royal family. Then, of course, you have the security surrounding the crowned heads of Europe who are here, King Harold of Norway, King Albert, King of Belgians, the Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, all of them obviously needing their own security with them. So a nightmare logistically, but obviously very necessary. The Prince of Wales talking to his brother there, the Duke of York. And let's not forget the Duke of York has himself seen action. He served in the Falklands as a pilot in the Royal Navy and is a serving naval officer. He is in command of his own vessel, HMS Cottesmore.
No, we haven't seen the Queen yet, Simon. Because of, obviously, the delay that we've experienced here today.
I think, as we were saying earlier, she will be very conscious of the age of the people who really around whom this whole ceremony is centred, and these are the veterans you're watching now, and she'll be very keen that they're not standing there too long for no other good reason, of course, than the fact the tide will be coming in. So she'll be very keen to be here on time. She's due here in about half an hour, but of course you have to allow travel time for that. She'll be taking one of the Wessex helicopters of the Queen's flight 30 miles down here. As Tim was saying, she is due to be having a break for tea. That will not obviously now be happening, and she'll be keen to get down here as soon as possible. Her sister, Princess Margaret, who was 10 when the war started, will be remembering her days at Windsor Castle 50 years ago.
Fanfare there, played by the trumpeters from the Royal Air Force Band School of Music at Cranwell. That's their representation here. Of course, they were represented at the Bayer Memorial Service this morning. Now, what's scheduled to happen is that all the members of the royal family, barring the Queen, are scheduled to go down onto the beach for a walkabout, and the veterans get a chance to chat with them. that should fill the half-hour gap while we wait for Her Majesty to arrive to take the salute, and for her to make a speech, and for the Mayor of Arromosh to make a speech, which we're told is a very moving tribute to the old men he surveys before him, the men who came here 50 years ago to liberate the village of which he is now the mayor of. Whilst the veterans stand on the beach and wait, for those of them who are not speaking with members of the royal family, they'll be entertained by the 5 different bands playing various virulent melodies and various marching memories.
This, I think, an illustration of the Queen's wish that members of the royal family meet as many of the veterans as possible, and reiterating once again the importance of the royal family during the Second World War. It's very easy for generations these days to forget that at times such as war, the royal family did become a great centerpiece, a great focus for attention, not just of the troops but of civilians as well. And the veterans today, events of recent years will be miles away in their minds. This is a royal family which very much helped them through the very grim days of the D-Day landings of the Second World War, and they'll be nothing but thrilled that they've come here to see them on the beach today.
Alistair was just saying earlier on how important it was in the soldiers' minds that they could actually focus on that they had king and country to fight for. Absolutely.
It is not a glib thing to say that the thought of king and country was very much in their minds as they approached these beaches, not knowing what was ahead of them. But I think if Alistair confirms this, king and country was very much at the forefront of minds at that stage.
I think that any soldier needs something to focus on for his morale. And when you're planning to build up your soldiers to their absolute peak of readiness, when you had such a fantastic example as King George VI and Queen Elizabeth to focus upon as the very personification of the country, and after all, the crown in Great Britain is symbolically representative not just of the people who wear it, but of the whole nation and the people in the nation. And the sovereign, therefore, is merely a personification of the nation-state. And therefore, for king and country really means for all of us. And that's how it was conveyed, and that's how it was understood at the time these people landed on these beaches.
As we see these men here today, just remind ourselves that the Hampshires were the first men on the beach here. They stepped clear of the breakers. They found themselves in a confusion of disabled tanks taking heavy fire from mortars and machine guns without safe lanes across the beach. They were to lose some 200 men that day. Their battalion commander was wounded, the second in command killed. Instead of a direct assault, they turned away east, circling around through Les Roquettes, behind La Hamelle. Eventually, a pétard, a tank, French tank with a huge mortar instead of a gun, fired one of its 40-pound flying dustbins, as they were known, into a sanatorium that was held by the Germans, and reduced it to silence. I might add that these are exclusive shots on Sky Television as you watch Prince Charles meeting British veterans that have gathered here on Gold Beach at Arromosh, shaking hands with each of them, really. Tim?
I was just reminded there when you were talking about the fact that the British turned away to the east when they came into the direct frontal assault. These men's fathers were the ones that fought the First War, and British military thinking was dominated by the incredible losses suffered by that. And after that, the British military thinking was that they did not want to get involved in direct frontal assaults without the backup of the heavy weaponry. And of course, as you've said, that's exactly what happened. As these guys realized that the firepower was overwhelming, they waited and brought in sort of firepower that could match it, and then they broke through Hitler's Atlantic Wall. They seem to be enjoying themselves. It's quite an honor for them. Prince Charles himself is a serving member of the military, and of course has earned his wings the real way by jumping out of aeroplanes, and he's completed his course. He's accompanied there, you see, by an officer from the parachute regiment. These guys, no doubt, will have some amount of respect for airborne. Some of them, in fact, are members of the airborne division which landed in the night of the 5th and 6th. And as you can see, backing up what Simon said, Prince Charles and the other members of the royal family really taking time, and they've got the time. They've got this 20 minutes now in which to meet as many veterans as possible, which is a great thrill for them.
In many ways, actually, Simon, here in London, it's fortunate that things were delayed, because Was this 20-minute window planned?
I think what was planned is that the Queen is to get there in 20 minutes. What happened in between was that she was supposed to have a bit of a rest, a break period in which she could have a cup of tea and generally get ready for what will be a moving ceremony for her. What will inevitably have to happen is she's going to have to come straight here, hopefully as near 5 o'clock local time as possible. Because, as I said, she will be very anxious not to keep these men waiting, although they will be thrilled that Prince Charles and other members of the royal family have come down to the beach to talk to them now. And as Tim was saying, Prince Charles will have a feel for what they've been through, in that he was a serving officer, he has a service history, but not, of course, the same as the Duke of York, who served in the Falklands. And again, for the Queen, I think that will bring her closer to these men. She, as a mother, will understand what it is like to have a close relation, in her case a son, go into battle and not know, as she didn't during the Falklands campaign, what was going to be happening to Prince Andrew, and waiting for reports. A nerve-wracking time for any relative.
Oh, we've just heard that the commemoration at Omaha has finished, and of course that means that the Queen is on the way right now to Gold Beach here at Arromosh. We're watching pictures now of Prince Charles meeting British veterans, shaking hands with them. His brother, Prince Andrew, not far behind, making an effort, really, to get round as many people as possible and to discuss and just exchange ideas, exchange conversation about what happened on that day. Prince Charles getting a first-hand account from these veterans of what happened when they landed on the beach 50 years ago.
Prince Charles wearing the uniform of the Royal Dragoons, another regiment of which he's Colonel-in-Chief, but you'll note that he's wearing the badge of the Parachute Regiment on his sleeve there.
And they're not brief conversations, are they? I mean, once he gets locked in there, he seems certainly to be enjoying the actual history of the day being recounted to him.
Well, once these gentlemen start to talk, you cannot help but want to listen to them. They will all have such fascinating stories, and the Prince will be more than happy to listen to as many people as possible. This is really where they come into their own in many ways. The veterans very keen to talk to them, and them very keen to listen.
I just want to bring Alistair Bruce in here again, just the significance of the beach that these men are standing on, the location where they brought those mulberry harbours in, which were crucial, really, to the supply lines being maintained and the advance gaining ground on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, and it was a tremendously successful landing in the long run, because the 50th Infantry Division, the British 50th Infantry Division, moved forward fairly expediently and with great speed to Bayeux and captured it without any great damage being done to the city. And I think Montgomery was very proud of that, because he was a great man for his sense of history. And not only did he manage to secure the beach, get the mulberries in place, but also the minimum number of people that he could possibly have lost were lost, and he managed to achieve everything in relatively quick time. I mean, they were 9 miles in a very short period of time once they'd secured the beach.
Indeed, by 11 a.m. on day 2, there were 7 lanes leading away from Gold Beach, and the DD tanks, as we've explained before, the Donald Ducks with their duplex drive mechanism, were moving inland, and soon after midday the rest of the divisions were assembling on a beachhead 3 miles wide by almost as much deep.
Indeed, indeed, it was an incredible logistics achievement. And, you know, I said it before, if you don't have your food, you can't move. And an army marches on its stomach.
Now, at this stage, as we watch Princess Margaret meeting, again, these British veterans gathered here, displaying their medals and no doubt recounting their acts of heroism to Princess Margaret right now, it's timely to remember that even after D-Day, so much lay ahead of these men. The Battle of the Bulge, for instance, nothing was decided. The American panzer divisions were still there. Rommel, by this stage, was very much in command, and the Germans could have mounted an effective counter-offensive, couldn't they?
Oh, definitely. I think what stood in their way was Hitler's dogged determination to believe the very carefully orchestrated details that were being sent through the plant that we had, The Germans had sent a spy to London, and we had managed to turn him over to our side. And through that man, we were sending information that Hitler was doggedly determined to believe.
Well, watching Simon McCoy there, Prince Andrew talking to the veterans, and as you said earlier, of course, he has first-hand knowledge and first-hand experience of being in a war.
Indeed, and it had to go to the Prime Minister, the decision as to whether he should be allowed to go, and he had to refer to the Queen. And she said, he's a serving officer, he shouldn't be treated any differently, yes, he must go. And obviously a very difficult decision for any mother to make when it had to be her decision. All right, if you've joined up and served your time and you go, but for a second in line to the throne as he was then, a difficult decision for any mother to make. And she was as in the dark as any parent as to what was happening over in the Falklands. And I know Alistair will know this, he served there himself. It was a very harrowing time for relatives who just did not know what was going on, and the Queen was no different from anybody else.
And of course, the Queen Mother equally would have been willing to see her husband go on that D-Day offensive and land on the beaches.
She wrote in her diaries that she was very pleased at the news that he was thinking of going. And it was disappointment for her and for him, in fact, that they had to really realise that it wasn't on for a sovereign to be so near to what was a very dangerous place, particularly when the Prime Minister was also thinking of being in the same place at the same time. It just wasn't on, and they reluctantly realised that.
Alistair, as we watch these hundreds of veterans on Gold Beach at Arromanches, we think of the number of men that were lost on that first day, 6,500 of them. We think of the experiences these men had when they landed on the beaches and they were faced with German machine gun fire, artillery fire, and so many of them were killed on that first day, weren't they?
They certainly were. Going back to what Simon was saying over the relations and how affected they are, I mean, let's not forget that most of the people who serve in battles are actually not the people who are there, but they are the families who are left behind. And I almost think that they should be given medals. I mean, I think that, you know, if your son or your father is across the sea and you hear your king or you hear your prime minister announcing that the invasion is in place and you know that amongst the number is your father or your brother, heaven knows what must go through you anxiously as you think at home. I think that what you say there is very valid. I think that the relations do suffer. I know that my family probably suffered when I went to the Falkland Islands more than I did.
Yes, I mean, with when you actually say that, Alistair, it reminds me of that speech by Walter Ehlers, the American, explaining how his brother died on the beach and maybe beside him.
I know he held an incredible dignity right through, not that he lost it, but I mean at that point when he had to address the very death of his brother, who he'd obviously lived his whole youth with, to see that young body fall limp beside him must have been something he'll never forget.
Now let's just for a moment absorb this pomp and ceremony of what's going on at this moment on Gold Beach at Arromanches in Normandy.
One of the veterans holding up a photograph from long ago, and yet not so long ago. And you can bring these pictures here and you can see that these men are still with us. Well, there the bands are formed up. The three that were already on the beach, joined by the band of the Army Air Corps, will be on the far right of your picture wearing the blue berets. And conducting them, Academy Sergeant Major Warrant Officer David, excuse me, I stand corrected, or as you were, as they say in the military. The Senior Director of Music is Major Terry Davis of the Royal Artillery. You can see him there with the feather in his cap, just approaching the bands at the front. He's from the Royal Artillery, and he's arranged some of the music himself, saying it was an absolute honour to be chosen to arrange the music for this event. Well, a helicopter coming overhead now. They're in fact back on Senior Director of Music, Major Terry Davis, and we believe that to be the Queen's helicopter for the Royal flight. It's a Wessex. She's coming in to land at a hilltop just above us. We're then getting into Range Rover and come back down to the beach. Just going back to Terry Davis, interesting man. As I said, an absolute honour, he said. He was thrilled to be chosen. He's playing White Cliffs of Dover. This is a Vera Lynn melody. The White Cliffs of Dover, memories of Vera Lynn there, as the Royal Marine Band play on Gold Beach here in Arromosh. This, the site of the artificial harbours known by their code name Mulberries. These were made in sections, more than 200 of them. And they meant that the huge backup that was needed, within a fortnight after the D-Day landing, 26,000 tons of equipment and supplies were to arrive here. Now, Churchill had realised the need for the structures. We've seen them before as we watch the bands playing now, after a disastrous raid in Dieppe in 1942. That's when the Canadians landed, and there was no means for them to get their supplies ashore. Half of them, half the 5,100 troops then were killed. And of course, lessons were learned by that, and Churchill certainly didn't want a repeat of the same thing on this day. Let me just bring Alistair Bruce in for a moment here. You were actually remarking, Alistair, at the number of women that we're seeing here displaying their medals.
Yes, they obviously more than played their part, and indeed there were many operations in which they were required to give their part. Particularly the most dangerous of all, I think, which was those who were dropped behind enemy lines in the SOE or something like that. I mean, it must have been terrifying to set off from some quiet little airfield in England and to be dropped, and to then have to find your way around using your French to the best of your ability, finding the contacts in the resistance, and passing the vital messages that were needed towards the very last moments when they were tweaking the arrangements from Hampshire to make sure that Operation Overlord went according to plan. And don't forget that had they been caught, they would have been put through the most appalling torture, probably, to discover what they might know. They'd have probably had, sorry.
Not only that, but the actual participation of the women bringing back the injured from the D-Day.
Of course, on the medical front.
Yes, I'm thinking about the number of QA nurses, of course, who played their part in the field hospitals that were set up and had to be set up immediately that the D-Day landings began.
Indeed, and I mean, there's nothing, I'm afraid, no matter what the battle of the sexes, that cheers up a wounded soldier better than the kindly face of someone who reminds him possibly of his mother.
Tim Marshall in Normandy at Arromanches now. Have you managed to speak to any of the women who are there today?
We've spoken to a lot of the wives, not the actual women involved in the ceremony of the medals, and the wives are up there in the stands looking on with such pride. They know how much it means to their husbands and indeed to themselves. This is what we've all been waiting for now, Michael. These are the marching memories, and as you can hear, the veterans are in full cry. To go down onto the beach, I think you're going to see a lot of veterans singing along to this. They've been waiting for this one. These are called the Marching Memories, and we're going to hear an awful lot of songs that we know and love. And as I said, the veterans themselves really entering into the spirit of it now and singing along.
Bless all the sergeants of WOR, bless all the corporals and their brothers too, say goodbye to them all, head back to their village they crawl. They'll get no promotion this side of the ocean. Cheer on my land and bless them all. I got your telly.
Not only, Tim, are they in good physical condition, but they're in very fine voice as well, aren't they?
They are indeed. Wait till you get to the Siegfried line and wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. I hope we get time to fit those in before Her Majesty arrives, which we think is only a few minutes away. I think we all know this one.
Alistair Bruce here in the studio in London. It's remarkable to see so many young faces, and it's perhaps we should remind everybody that quite a lot of these men would have lied about their age, wouldn't they?
They certainly would, but their voices are very much up to it still today, don't you think?
But in order to actually serve in the army, they were quite willing to say, well, you know, I know the age of conscription is 17, but they were 15 or 16.
Some of them were. I mean, I don't know how they managed to get away with it, but they were determined to get in there. And in they went. And
the Prime Minister, John Major, arriving there, of course, 18 months of age on D-Day. He won't be able to recall much of what happened, but he'll certainly be talking to many people today who will.
Going back to what you were saying, apparently it was amazing apparently how many of the birth certificates disappeared in the Blitz. It was far in excess of the number that probably disappeared. It was a great excuse for a lot of those people aged 15, 16 who thought, I'd rather be out there serving my country and I can't wait a year or two to become of age. So yes, there was a common excuse. I lost my birth certificate in the Blitz.
I think they would have spotted that something was amiss in the recruiting office had Mr. Major turned up.
I know my own father actually said that when he joined the RAF, he joined at 16 and was quite prepared to say that he was 17 in order to go with his friends, and I suppose there was a degree of peer pressure. If you've just joined us, we're on Gold Beach at Arromanches, where we have seen in the past half hour Prince Charles and Prince Andrew meeting these British veterans individually, talking to them for quite a long time, and awaiting now the arrival of the Queen, who we expect to fly in a Wessex of the Queen's flight at any moment. She has had a break from the service at Omaha Beach, which took place about an hour ago. As Simon was saying, she's had time to have a brief break, a cup of tea and some refreshment, and everyone on the beach here at Gold Beach waiting, lined up. Hundreds of British veterans, John Major there and his wife. I'd just like to bring Alistair Bruce in here again.
I have a deliciously reassuring feel that, looking at the clock, we're going to bring timings right back on schedule in true British form, and recalling how important timings were once again in the whole military operation. And had any of the timings slipped too drastically, then there would have been tremendous problems for all those. And we must remember this huge queue of landing craft waiting one behind the other to come in after those who had captured the beaches.
I'm just wondering, Tim Marshall in Normandy, if they're pointing at the Queen's helicopter.
No, I don't think so. They can't see that from that particular position, but let's face it, Mike, there's an awful lot to look at here. Now, we're getting to the sea shanties. We're going to hear the sailor's hornpipe, the drunken sailor, and Portsmouth. As we move smoothly into the tune of Portsmouth, I can tell you that from directly in front of my position, out of camera shot though, I can see the Mayor of Arromanches just standing in the cobbled street, quietly waiting to see the Queen in, and they'll be introduced formally, I believe, on the beach. They'll both be making short speeches. I'm told by the Mayor that he wishes to pay tribute to the men in front of him, and also to stress that this is all about the young people of today as well, that they should learn from this.
The time is 4 o'clock here on Sky News. You join us from Normandy, Gold Beach, Arromanches, where British veterans are gathered here to mark the 50th D-Day anniversary. We have been watching in the past half hour Prince Charles and Prince Andrew recounting stories with the veterans who are gathered there, learning about what happened on that day, and talking to individual soldiers, men from the Parachute Regiment, men from the Marines, men from the Grenadier Guards, and men from the Hampshires, who, of course, were the first to land here on Gold Beach. Prince Charles, Prince Andrew taking their seats now, and any moment now we're expecting the Queen to arrive to complete the celebration. On the right of your picture there, the Liberal Democrats leader Paddy Ashdown, himself a former member of the SAS. On the left of the picture, Prime Minister John Major and his wife. Alistair Bruce here in London. Paddy Ashdown is certainly a man who would have understood what went on D-Day.
Certainly was. If I could just correct you, he was a member of the Special Boat Service, which is the Navy's equivalent, or rather the Royal Marines' equivalent.
I
of the Special Air
apologise.
Service. But he will certainly be able to conceive in his own mind, being an amphibious warfare trained soldier, exactly what was undertaken. And I expect as he sits there now silently looking at the beach, he must be thinking...
I just want to mention also the Ulster Unionist leader, Jim Molyneux, who was also a veteran of the D-Day landing, sitting beside him. But as you were saying, because he was in the special boat squadron, he would have understood exactly what it was to mount that sort of amphibious landing.
That's right, to look and see that. I should imagine the reason that they're all standing now is because Her Majesty the Queen will be arriving fairly shortly. And here, returning from doing more of the chatting, Princess Royal and Commander Tim Lawrence and their entourage.
And there are so many stories to recount, aren't there, Alistair?
Yes, the trouble is that with all these things, everybody is moving by timings. I've banged on about timing, so I shouldn't criticize it now. But they would probably have wanted to stay there for a great deal longer. Don't you think, Simon?
I think that's absolutely right. Princess Royal, all of them, Prince Charles, Duke of York, and Duke of Kent, you can see bottom right of your picture there. For him, a very poignant time. He was 6 years old when his father was killed during the Second World War. He was on active service and died in a plane over Scotland. So the Duke of Kent, pondering her father, he never really got to know. Of course, his younger brother, Prince Michael of Kent, had just been christened when their father was lost. So many memories for the royal family as well as all the veterans here today and watching on television, and let's not forget them.
Thousands of people, well, I'll hand over to you, Tim, just remarking the thousands of people who've turned out on the beach there at Arromosh to watch these celebrations today.
There have indeed 5,000 in the stands and perhaps as many in the surrounding areas along the seawall, stretching hundreds of yards each side of that. I was just about to say that somewhere in there, we haven't seen him yet, is Winston Churchill MP, who was the grandson of the wartime British leader.
Indeed, Alistair, Bruce, here in London, both Churchill and Eisenhower at this time on D-Day must have had heavy hearts. They wouldn't have known exactly what was going on, and it would have been perhaps another 24 hours before they would have been confident that things had gone according to plan.
It really does put into the balance what leadership is all about, and the decisions that they took were vital to the liberation of Europe. And thank goodness that there are men of that mettle thrown into the world arena when we really need them. Let's hope in future, when we really need a leader, we'll find one.
Now a Range Rover is just driving past our commentary position. And in fact, yes, the Queen has just passed by me, and her Land Rover is now at the head of the beach, you can see there. In about 20 seconds' time, I hope you will be able to see her. In fact, the door's just been opened. The mayor of Arromosh, which is a very small town, of course, a great honour for him. He's about to meet the Queen above the seawall and out of your camera shot. We're having a few words while the veterans line up. I think they'll be aware now that Her Majesty has arrived, some 4 minutes late. So that's some catching up they've done, considering they were 20 minutes behind schedule down at Omaha about an hour ago. As you can just see there next to the French tricolour, there is Her Majesty. What you can't see is that she's being introduced to the commander of the UK 3rd Division, General Sir Michael Jackson, and as I said, the mayor of Arromosh.
Simon McCoy here in London. The Queen looking forward to this enormously, I suppose.
Absolutely, and about to be reunited with her sister, Princess Margaret. For those that can remember, they were girl guides, and the two princesses continued their activities throughout the war years at Windsor Castle. They even camped out with their troop overnight, and although the younger, more extrovert, some would say, Princess Margaret loved this, Princess Elizabeth clearly did not. But they played hostess to groups of officers at the castle, sometimes entertaining them to tea or lunch. And all those who went said if you sat at Princess Margaret's end of the table, the conversation never lapsed for a moment. And after the meal, there would be guessing games and charades. So they were, even at their young age of 14 and 18, doing what they could to help troops who were stationed at Windsor Castle through the war years. Duke of Edinburgh there, as we've said before, a serving naval officer throughout the Second World War, and was on D-Day travelling to the Far East on HMS Whelp. So he'll have his memories of that too. And let's not forget all those who died in the Second World War. Of course, we're remembering one particular day today, but there'll be others in the minds of members of the royal family and others here today.
Her Majesty now descending the seawall. She'll arrive on the beach in just a few seconds' time. Out of picture, walking around the back of the stand, is the mayor, who will go back onto the beach to greet her formally, in full view of the thousands of spectators and, of course, thousands of veterans. The voice there you can hear, Academy Sergeant Major Warrant Officer David Cox of the Grenadier Guards. He's got a very loud voice, but he needs it. The Queen waving firstly to spectators lined up on the beach, and then she'll come round and drive slowly around the square. In the background you saw the 21-gun salute of HMS Edinburgh, still firing out there at sea. Queen and the Duke occasionally glancing up onto the sea line as HMS Edinburgh makes her way across.
Simon McCoy here in London. This really is the moment that these men that have waited here on the beach for the past hour have been waiting for, the arrival of the Queen.
That's right, and they'll remember what she did during the war years. It was the first time she'd ever broadcast to the nation and to Europe during the Second World War. Her first broadcast in the BBC's Children's Hour in 1940, and she was joined at the very end by Princess Margaret, and it was an impromptu appearance. The Queen, as she is now, Princess Elizabeth, said, "My sister's by my side, and we're both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret." And at that, the 10-year-old Princess Margaret got out of her chair, went to the microphone and said, "Good night and good luck to you all." It sounds somewhat pithy now, but 50 years ago, believe me, that meant so much to the relatives and the civilians waiting for news of loved ones who'd gone to serve across the Channel. And these veterans will remember those days as though they were yesterday.
And we're just listening to HMS Edinburgh fire the 21-gun salute.
That gun salute timed exactly so that HMS Edinburgh comes into view directly in front of the beach, and by the time it's fired its 21 shots, it's gone out from the other side of that square formed up by the veterans.
And of course, that 21-gun salute, Alistair Bruce here in London, reminding us of the importance of the naval bombardment to back up these men when they landed on the beach, or indeed before they landed on the beach.
It makes it much easier for soldiers invading any beachhead that the enemy who are dug in and at a tremendous advantage should at least have a headache. And the Royal Navy came into their own in those vital hours. And to hear those haunting sounds of the 21-gun salute, which must ring a memory in those minds as we look at the gentleman now. And the gunnery, although it fires its salute, there is no ordnance being impacted upon the beach, and there's a very different sound. But when you had the gun fired and then the explosion of ordnance all around you and in front of you, then the cacophony must itself have been something for these men to have fought against in their rigorous way of attacking those beaches.
The Queen will now disembark from her vehicle in front of the dais, and just in the background there you caught a shot of the mayor who will greet her. down onto the beach. Door opened for her there by Sergeant David Harris of the Royal Logistic Corps, who, as I said, are all off to Bosnia on the 1st of October. And now we'll follow a speech, both of them in English. This is a very British event. After that, Her Majesty is scheduled to meet Simone Veil, who, as well as being the French Minister for Health and Social Affairs, is also a survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp. There is Monsieur le Maire, Jean-Paul Lecomte, been the Mayor of Arromanches since 1983. Monsieur Lecomte has taken this week to driving around his village, his town, in an open-top American Jeep. He's been having great fun inspecting all the different areas of which he has responsibility. But he's changed now into his best blue suit. He's changed his car, and he's now about to make what we understand will be a formal and perhaps an emotional speech. He's representing, of course, the people of this town, one of the first towns to be liberated from Nazi rule. I believe actually the amount of time it took for the HMS Edinburgh to get across, that was could well have been a 42-gun salute, not a 21.
The Academy Sergeant Major there, the Senior Sergeant Major of the British Army, standing everyone at ease and telling them to listen in.
Your Majesty, veterans, ladies and gentlemen.
This is Jean-Paul Lecomte, Mayor of Arromanches.
En votre nom, en l'honneur des vétérans, je m'exprimerai en anglais. Welcome to France. Welcome to Normandy. Welcome to Arromanches.
That welcome extended to all the veterans, not just to Her Majesty.
We all wanted this 6th of June to be exceptional, unforgettable, and colorful. It's the D-Day for remembering, for emotion, and for giving thanks. This long-awaited day for which we have prepared so hard over many months is a day when our hearts will beat strongly, a day when our eyes will be damp with tears. Normandy is where memories come together. The whole population rejoices to welcome you, you, the soldier of the longest day, you, the soldiers of liberty. I can't express, Your Majesty, how pleased and proud we are that you have chosen Arromanches as a place where we can all render homage at the great number of veterans gathered here. Veterans, you trod this Normandy sand 50 years ago. We are on the very spot of your magnificent conquest. How I wish to celebrate this anniversary together, today, joyfully. doesn't take away for a moment the memory of the darkest hours of June 1944. What a terrible sacrifice the people of Britain made to liberate Europe, and what tears were shed by Normandy left, wounded and scarred. We must keep these pages of the book of history, so our young generation, on whom the future of our democracy rests, will not forget that peace is worth all this, and that your sacrifices were made for our freedom.
A 4-minute speech there from the Mayor of Arromanches. He was scheduled just for 3 minutes, but he put his heart into that speech. Quite an honour, really, that he spoke in English on French soil. Now, Her Majesty.
Monsieur le Maire, thank you for the welcome which you and the citizens of Arromanches have extended to Prince Philip, to me, and to all our countrymen. I am glad that the government of France is represented here by Madame Simone Veil. By the courage which she and a multitude like her displayed in the Nazi concentration camps, she represents perfectly why we are here today, to remember
Simone Veil there, a survivor of Auschwitz.
To remember and to give thanks for deliverance. This town and this beach must hold a unique place in the memories of those of you who were here in June 1944. I am proud to see so many veterans of Operation Overlord, one of the most remarkable amphibious operations ever accomplished. You and the widows of those who fought will be remembering the deeds that were done that day. The comrades and husbands who never returned, and those who did come home, but sadly are no longer with us. D-Day was indeed the beginning of the end. The months of planning at home, of preparation by the French resistance, all conducted in the utmost secrecy, culminated here in Normandy that day, beginning the liberation first of France and finally of Europe. Many of you will have in your minds vivid pictures, perhaps some all too vivid, of that epic day and of the heroism and endurance shown by our own troops and by our allies. Those of us who were far away can only imagine what it was like and stand back in admiration of those who planned and fought for the establishment of that hard-won bridgehead. It was you and your comrades and allies fighting on other fronts who delivered Europe from that yoke of organized barbarism from which the men and women of following generations have been mercifully free. They should remember that they owe that freedom to those who fought and defeated Nazism. Next year, we shall commemorate the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Old adversaries are now reconciled. But the Europe which we know today could not exist had not the tide of war been turned here in Normandy 50 years ago. Veterans of the Normandy campaign, you deserve your nation's thanks. May we, your fellow countrymen, be worthy of what you did for us.
Well, what a fitting and quite moving and glowing tribute to the efforts that those men on the beach made 50 years ago. There now follows a march past, followed by a fly past of the Battle of Britain Memorial flight. Queen will then go up onto the Esplanade to meet the veterans who couldn't make it down for health reasons, some of them in wheelchairs. And then finally there'll be a sunset ceremony on the Esplanade. And time and tide wait for no one. And then the men must leave the beach, for many, of course, the last time they'll ever walk those sands. They walked them 50 years ago, and they're very glad to be back. Academy Sergeant Major Warrant Officer David Cox of the Grenadier Guards, busy organising what for him is quite an unusual parade ground. So far, everything like clockwork.
Simon McCoy here in London. I thought I detected a quiver in the Queen's voice there as she was thanking the veterans.
I think you're right. I think she's been as moved as everybody else by this commemoration. And this particular service at Arromanches was always going to be the focus for so much British attention. And she'll, of course, be thinking of her own mother, who'll be in London watching these very same pictures today, thinking of her own role 50 years ago for the Queen and for Princess Margaret, both sharing some very vivid memories now as they watch the veterans march past.
Perhaps we could bring Alistair Bruce in here. Alistair, tell us about some of these medals that you're seeing displayed here.
Well, directly in front of us now, the gentleman on the right of the line, just turning to the left to salute his sovereign, is wearing an MC. Presumably he may well have won that on these beaches 50 years ago.
That's quite possibly the case, Alistair, because these are the men of the Hampshires, the very first men who landed on Gold Beach.
Indeed, Tim, the Hampshires, as you say, were first ashore. They were preceded by specialised tanks, and the main aim on this most westerly beach in the British and the Canadian sector, as I think I said earlier this afternoon, was to seize Bayeux, which of course they did. These operations would include securing Arromanches, which was a fortified village a mile or so west of the beach, because this was to be the anchorage, of course, as we've said again before, for the Mulberry Harbour. Now, when the Hampshires first landed here on Gold Beach, they stepped clear of the breakers. They found themselves in a confusion of disabled tanks taking heavy fire from mortars and machine guns without safe lanes across the beach. They were to lose some 200 men that day. Many of those friends of the men that stand on the beach now.
Well, they had a good time before singing. Then, of course, came the quite fitting and moving tributes paid by the Mayor and by the Queen. And now we get back to the music, and I think they're enjoying themselves again. We've spent about a week over here, the Sky team, and we've been moving with them a lot and talking to them a lot, sitting with them. And they really are terrific men, stories to tell. Michael, something you said earlier, that perhaps they were recounting tales of their bravery. only to a point. What they do when you sit down and chat with them is they tell you about other people's bravery. The guy next to them, their officer, the corporal that did such and such that they knew, or their friend that did something extremely brave and then was killed. They very rarely mention their own heroic feats. And just by being there, of course, it took quite something to go through what they went through. Most of them did not want to be there.
Alistair
Indeed,
Bruce.
why should they?
Sorry, Tim. Alistair Bruce here in London. Tell us something about this colourful display of flags which are being carried here.
Well, they're all the memorials and colours of the different regiments, and, well, more than that, the associations who are represented here. The Royal British Legion, the associations, the naval associations, all of the colours, as I was explaining earlier on, to some extent represent the souls of the organisations and regiments and ships and the air forces that they represent. And I think that in that they represent the soul of those people, they also represent the people who once served alongside these veterans. And as they fill with wind, these flags do, to some extent, express the presence of the fallen.
The fly past by World War II aircraft that were involved in the centre. I think we've seen that plane before, the Flying Fortress, the American bomber, flanked on either side by fighters. Crucial, of course, to the whole D-Day attack was the earlier bombardment by the Air Force. They had enormous difficulty because of the lack of visibility on that day. Needless to say, they were effective in destroying many of the German defences, which enabled this historic landing to take place.
Mike, let's check this with Alistair. My information is that should be a Lancaster, but actually, let's just listen to the singing. That's much more interesting.
I agree with you, it is a Lancaster, and let's listen to the singing.
I deserve to be reprimanded there for certainly making that sort of mistake about mixing a Lancaster up with a Flying Fortress.
Mike, it's the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and these men happy to see it and happy to be singing Long Way to Tipperary. This is part of marching medleys that should go smoothly into a whole load of others, which we all know and love.
And she's loving this, isn't she?
She looks very moved, doesn't she?
We saw her wiping a tear away a short while ago. The commemoration side of this is now over. We're there to celebrate with these veterans who are here today.
This is the arrangement which the director of music put together himself. He's very proud of it, and he said to me the other night, I want you to listen to this because I like it and I hope you do.
Pictures we've ever seen of the Queen, Simon.
You will rarely see Her Majesty looking quite so relaxed on what is a public event. Evocative, really, of those black and white pictures at the end of the war, VE Day, when she was on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and joined by the Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The pleasure of that day reflected, I think, in Her Majesty's face today. You're right, she really is enjoying this. As are they.
Of course, within the past hour or so, we saw Prince Andrew and Prince Charles talking to individual veterans. And as you said, Tim, earlier, obviously discussing their own experiences, but also these veterans recounting the experiences of others and the bravery of others. They're not terribly anxious to talk about their own bravery.
The Queen, mark of brave men. Beg your pardon, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, the Queen, indeed, when she addressed everyone on Gold Beach, said that she could only imagine what it was like and stood back in admiration. She said, we owe the freedom that we enjoy today to those who fought and defeated Nazism.
I've seen the Queen at many events and occasions like this, and I have never seen her enjoying it quite so much.
Alistair, it must be, for these veterans as well, it must be one of the proudest days of their life just to be marching in front of the Queen.
I think more than pride, they just must be delighted to be together again and alive. I mean, just the thought of having to reflect upon the loss of so many of their friends, but now to just really rejoice in the very essence of life and freedom that they fought for.
Alistair, look at the Queen's eyes. I think she's trying to look every one of these men in the eyes. Look at what she's trying to do here. She wants to remember them, and she wants them to remember her. And I bet that was a response to "away" from one of them.
Just a shame, actually, Simon, that we can't hear what she's saying.
Royal protocol forbids that, but I don't think you need to, actually. I think you can see on the look on her face what the sentiment would be. And the important thing is, so can the veterans.
I'm remembering the childhood words that I learned to this tune, but I shan't repeat them now.
All the old guys know them as well. I'm just thinking back, some of the ceremonies we've been seeing all day, often the word England comes up. England expects every man to do his duty, and a little corner of a foreign field, which is forever England. And yet, of course, we mustn't lose sight, this was very much a British, United Kingdom event. The men from all over the United Kingdom and all over the British Isles came, and they're all represented here.
As we watch these veterans, it takes us back to what we were saying earlier about the sort of thing they encountered when they landed on the beach, how they had to clamber out of their assault craft and come under fire from the Germans who were lined up before them. And it was really an impossible task to get through, but they succeeded at the end of the day.
Well, I remember in my humble start to being a soldier being taught to dash, down, crawl, observe, sights, fire. But good heavens, a dash of a mile, down in nothing to cover you, crawl, well, where do you go? Observe, what can you look at? Sights and fire at heaven knows what. I mean, it must have been almost impossible for these chaps to have established themselves. It looks like the tide's coming in, doesn't it?
Well said, time and tide wait for no man, and this is the last time most of these men will walk these sands.
Well,
and I think the Queen recognises that as well. You know, when like I said, she was looking back into their eyes and them looking at her, and perhaps it won't happen in 10 years' time, but I don't think they care. This is their day, and they're loving every minute of it.
Indeed, 50 years ago today, at this time, many of them were up to their necks in water. They hadn't even got off the assault craft. And as we've said before, they had endured a rigorous journey across the Channel. They were in poor health at that stage. Many of them were seasick, but yet they had to get on and fight this battle with the German forces.
It'll take quite some time to get all the men off. There's so many thousands of them came here, which is why we're going to run through songs like the Siegfried Line and Lily Marlene and Run Rabbit Run. And when that's finished, the Queen will go up to the Esplanade and meet the veterans in the wheelchairs, and we're told at that point she should stop and have a chat with quite a few of them. At that point there'll be what's called the sunset ceremony on the Esplanade, when the parachute regiment will play and the various standards and flags will be lowered. Before that happens, we expect to see the standards being landed from the beach of the three services, plus the British Legion and the National Veterans Association.
Indeed, you talked about so many men, indeed thousands of them in wheelchairs, which really emphasizes the point that so many men were injured on that day. Alistair. It really incredible that it was incredible that so many survived it, but there are many, many injuries to tell the tale.
Yes, there are, and I'm always very impressed by the amount of work that is done by the various service charities in looking after those who are in some way disabled by war. And I think for my generation, an event like this focuses the mind. Later on in the year, in November, there will be some red collection boxes waved in my general direction, and I'll be asked to contribute to poppies. I hope that I remember then the emotion that I feel right now, and the debt that I feel to all these people who have given me the freedom to live my life, because so many of their contemporaries badly need the assistance and help that the paltry amount that we can all quite comfortably give to the Poppy Appeal and to all the other charities that look after so many of these wounded servicemen who've given so much 50 years ago and at all other occasions.
They're marching off to the sound of the Siegfried Line. I'll be hanging out the washing on the Siegfried Line, if the Siegfried Line's still there, reference to, of course, the German defences. And as they march off, happily, we have no reports of any injuries. There's a big medical team here. As far as we know, they have not been called or pressed into service.
That she wanted to join one of the women's services, and reluctantly, it has to be said, he allowed her to join the auxiliary transport service. And when she was registered, she was number 230873, second subaltern, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, age 18, eyes blue, hair brown, height 5 foot 3 inches. She was issued with the regulation khaki uniform and peaked cap. And you'll remember many people seeing the black and white pictures of her in that very uniform on VE Day when she appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with Prime Minister Winston Churchill and her father, King George VI.
Saying royal protocol doesn't allow us to know what she's saying. I think she's singing on occasion.
Tim, you know the words.
Only the chorus, but listen to they do.
There's certainly no concealing her enjoyment. And in the preceding picture, actually, we saw, and you were remarking, Alistair, that the tide is coming in very quickly.
Well, it certainly comes in very, very fast. I only know that from my pathetic attempts to be a sailor, but it sounds like the aeroplanes are coming.
No, there's another fly past. I won't, on this occasion, attempt to identify the aircraft, but I think it is a Lancaster bomber. In fact, I'm pretty well sure it's a Lancaster bomber, is it?
Just flew right over where I was standing, and yes, I think it was, with a Spitfire to its left. Battle of Britain Memorial flight again, I think.
Tim, what's the sound like there when those aircraft go over?
I'm sorry, I can't hear a thing. There's a plane flying overhead.
I think really the sounds of this day, every sound that these men will have heard, ranging from the 21-gun salute to the salvos that were released by the naval destroyers in the Channel, will remind them and really cause so many flashbacks of what happened on the day. The noise of the aircraft above them, the noises, I said, of the naval bombardment, which was so crucial to destroying the German defences in advance of them landing on the beaches.
For those of us here, Michael, if you let me say on a personal note, we feel quite privileged to be here. It's terrific. We've had a great week. It was a fabulous day yesterday, seeing the paradrops, and then seeing all the various ceremonies today, and then culminating in this, what is a wonderful parade. I know the whole Sky team out here really do feel privileged to be here. And if you'll indulge me, what we keep saying about these men, keep describing them as good old boys, and I hope that doesn't sound too patronising. It's a real mark of affection and respect. That's exactly what they are. The town's been flooded with them. The whole area, in fact, about 20 miles. Every hotel is full. Every restaurant is full every night. Everywhere you go, you see these men in the restaurants with their medals and caps, and the local population have taken kindly to them as they do each year, but this time, of course, a mass invasion 50 years on. And the people of Normandy have thrown open their doors wide, not just to the British, of course, but to the Americans, the Canadians, and all the other nationalities. There we see the standards of various sections, the women's overseas section there.
Alistair, quite a few women among the ranks there. Just remind us of their effort during the war.
Well, considerable. I mean, from every point of view. I mean, from making or helping make the ammunitions to being in the SOE and going behind enemy lines and doing the essential things that only they could do, and also from the nursing point of view and countless other ways. But I think more particularly than anything else, by giving the encouragement to many of the soldiers who went to war and welcoming them home with the love and affection that basically every soldier fights to protect the existence of.
And of course, because of the chaos that ensued just after the landing on the beaches, very few of the medical supplies that were needed so urgently arrived until the second day or the third day.
Every soldier carries a certain amount of instant first aid kit upon him, but of course, as you say, with the appalling injuries that were taking place, they badly needed as much stuff as they could to follow up. And it did take a bit of time, but it wasn't too bad. I mean, the field hospitals and the casualty handling, considering the amount of, well, look at it, the appalling figures of deaths and injuries. You can always put a huge multiplication sign after the deaths to work out what the injuries were and all these things. And it was an incredible logistic backfeed of injured people to the United Kingdom, let alone the input of more munitions and supplies.
I know we've repeated this figure throughout the day, but it's worth repeating because 6,500 people were dead after the first day of the D-Day landings. And as we were saying earlier, the work of the QAs, the work of the surgeons, the army surgeons who managed to set up field hospitals within the first 24 hours and treat so many hundred men. And many of the men that are here on the beach at Gold Beach in Arromanches today will be grateful and indeed owe their lives to the efforts of those women who cared for them on that day.
Oh, without doubt. And I'm sure a lot of them struck up good friendships. And as I was saying earlier on, in the end, when all is said and done, there is nothing more reassuring to a wounded soldier than the sight of somebody who might possibly in some way remind him of his mother.
Simon McCoy, our royal correspondent, we have been remarking in the past half hour just how much the Queen is enjoying this ceremony.
As I've said, I don't think I've seen pictures of her quite so relaxed and determined to enjoy a day as I have now. Let's reflect earlier on, we saw the commemoration at various cemeteries throughout this region, but this was a chance for her, for the veterans, to let their hair down in many ways, and we've seen her doing just that.
Queen there chatting to Simone Veil, former president of the European Parliament and the current French Minister for the Health and Social Affairs. And as we said before, as a 16-year-old, she was in the Nazi concentration camp at Auschwitz. Her entire family died in that camp. Which brings us back to the reason why these men came to the beaches, to liberate them and then push through into Germany. One unit, 6th Commando, actually ended up liberating Belsen concentration camp. Forgive the somber note, but again, it's a reminder of exactly why these men came here. I should also point out that the sand stretches down the Normandy beach, one way to Omaha in Utah in the American sector, but it goes the other way to Juneau and to Sword. And there are smaller ceremonies being held there, sometimes just perhaps 50 to 100 people attending, little villages holding their own events, little plaques being unveiled here and there. This is the big one, but there's things going on right across this peninsula today.
The one armed service not represented at court during most of the Second World War was in fact the Royal Air Force, and King George VI wanted to change that, and in 1944 went to the Air Chief Marshal and said, I want to change it, have you anybody in mind? And he immediately came up with the name of a Battle of Britain pilot who'd been much decorated, a man by the name of Peter Townsend. And as Princess Margaret watches ceremonies today, those other war years will have an added significance for that.
As you join us now, we're at Gold Beach at Arromanches, where the Queen, Princess Margaret, Prince Philip are watching as the veterans march past, hundreds of them, hundreds of British veterans march past, with all the bands and the colours and the emblems of their regiments. We've seen the Queen smiling all afternoon. We've seen her join in on occasions.
Blue berets of the band of the Army Air Corps, just moving through shot there. This tune, I believe, Marching Memories. And as I said, there is the band of the Army Air Corps, one of 5 bands playing here today. We've seen 4 of them. Shortly, I suspect we'll be seeing the band of the Parachute Regiment. The men are nearly off, at which point the Queen, there will be a short ceremony where I believe the standards will be brought ashore from the sea. British Grenadier Guards is now struck up.
British soldiers have been marching to that tune for at least 300 years.
I believe that is the Princess of Wales's Royal Regimental Band and the 1st Battalion of the Royal Anglicans, which was amalgamated with the Hampshires. And as we've said before, the Hampshires, of course, the first onto the beach. Well, this is taking some time, which is actually a good thing, because it suggests just how many people, how many veterans were able to get here. The Ministry of Defence really had no idea. They thought it could be as little as 4,000 or as much as 10,000. I suspect the figure is somewhere in between. Well, that more or less concludes the march past, and we'll now move to the standards being brought ashore, after which there'll be a short ceremony up on the esplanade. Queen there chatting to her sister, Prince Margaret, and to her 2 sons, Charles and Andrew. Just behind the Queen there, it's the General, excuse me, he hasn't been knighted yet, as you were. That's General Michael Jackson, commander of the 3rd Division of the British Army, and a former paratroop. Yesterday, he jumped out of a plane again at the age of 57. Said he enjoyed every minute of it. That was part of the parachute drop to commemorate the landings at Pegasus Bridge and the airborne parachutists who came down to support the gliders. Updating you on yesterday, there were 5 injuries. If you watched our live coverage of the parachute drop, we're happy to tell you today, none of them serious. In fact, the most serious one was the gendarme who fell off his bicycle.
Well, it's quite amazing, actually, Tim, if you consider the number of veterans there and their ages, many of them in their 70s and their 80s.
The fact that none of them appear to have been injured here today, yes, absolutely. The medical people were fully expecting that perhaps there'd be a couple of people fainting after having stood there for an hour, or perhaps even worse, and yet, as far as we know, they have not been called into action.
And there, Alistair, we hear the sound of the piper, and as I said before, all remembering that film, The Longest Day, and how the Scottish regiments were led into battle.
This is a piper
with the piper ahead of them.
From the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, Michael. This piper is piping Her Majesty off the beach, said from the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment. Pipers haven't been much in evidence, unfortunately. Just mentioning the film The Longest Day there, I seem to remember the British actor Richard Todd, one of the actors in that. He was actually a paratrooper during the war, and he dropped on D-Day over Normandy in the night of the 5th into the 6th. Took part in the raids around the Pegasus Bridge area.
In fact, actually, I think he parachuted into St. Mary-Glees, actually, Tim. And we do remember the picture of the piper getting off one of those troop carriers straight into the sea, waist high in water, and leading the men onto the beach under fire from the Germans.
That did happen. Chap's name was Bill, and when all the men were pinned down, his commanding officer said, well, go on then, get up and play. And he did get up in the midst of the gunfire, and he strode up and down the beach, and that rallied the men, and they were able to form up again. It was one of the things that rallied them. asked afterwards about how on earth he survived, he said he thought the Germans must have considered him to be completely mad and therefore didn't fire at him.
The Queen there, spending some time with some of the veterans, then with many stories to tell, they telling her some of them. One story she's probably not telling them is that when she was in the Auxiliary Transport Service, one of her important jobs was to drive her commanding officer from Aldershot back to Buckingham Palace. And one thing he didn't tell the King when he arrived is that she'd actually driven around Piccadilly Circus twice. He couldn't bring it in himself to...
This is the first time the Queen has been this close to the public now, which is why you're hearing the cheering. They're very happy to see her. She's coming along the front of the seawall, in front of the stand, where the veterans in wheelchairs are waiting. And it's understood there will be time for her to meet and chat with several of them before sunset call, when the flags will be lowered to the sound of RAF trumpeters and perhaps the the Parachute Regimental Band, which is also standing by in that area. Majesty there, lost in the crowd. As I said, just waiting for the final few minutes of this ceremony to take place, which is a short walkabout, the sunset call. And then I think it's possible that the bringing in of the standards from the sea may have been called off. That could still happen. It's various standards are brought ashore by amphibious vehicles. But at the moment, it's looking just like the walkabout, and then the trumpeters will play the flags to be lowered. You'd appreciate this is one of the areas that the cameras are not allowed to get too close to, because it's private moments where she's allowed to finally really get close to some of the veterans.
I was about to say, Tim, this is an image you don't often see, one that the public, if they're not at an event, take for granted, is that the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh do spend much time in private talking to people, exchanging stories, and this perhaps is a chance to refocus on the royal family as they are now, not as they were 50 years ago.
Indeed, the Queen there, Simon, talking to a man who obviously lost his sight on that day. By now, actually, between them, the Queen, Prince Charles and Prince Andrew must have been talking to hundreds of veterans.
I think that's right, and let's not forget that somewhere in one of her pockets will be a camera. She does record these events. She likes to, regardless of the press and the number of cameras there, she likes to take her own camera so she can snap a quick record for her own album. And then she'll gather the royal family at family occasions and look through that album and talk about her memories of the day. And she'll be very aware of the history of the event today and her small but important part in it.
There you can see the 4 RAF trumpeters waiting to play in the sunset call. That's Sergeant Paul Wilson will be leading them, accompanied by Sergeant Steve Mayer, Corporal Iford Davis, and Corporal Crawford Cook. They're all from the RAF College Band at Cranwell. Staying aboard the Sir Galahad. The Navy's putting them up and flying them in by helicopter, and we'll be taking them back there tonight.
Let's not forget either that the first Prime Minister to serve under the Queen when she acceded to the throne in 1952 was in fact Winston Churchill. So memories of D-Day, memories of the Second World War will also bring to her memories of Winston Churchill, a man for whom she is said to have the greatest respect of all the Prime Ministers who have served under her.
And the relationship between Churchill and the royal family at that time was very close.
It was very close, and let's not forget that not long beforehand the royal family had had perhaps its biggest crisis of the century with the abdication of Edward VIII. George VI, a shy man, not expecting to become king, suddenly taking the throne with his wife at his side, Queen Elizabeth, now the Queen Mother, who, let's not forget today, she'll be watching these pictures without any doubt at home in London.
And I suppose wishing that she was there.
I think there'll be an element of that. She's 93 years old, 94 in August, and the practicalities of her visit were considered at an early stage, and it was felt that perhaps she'd be better off at home, and I'm sure with regret she will have agreed with that decision.
The weather hasn't been too unkind to them today.
Reflecting in many ways the weather 50 years ago, doesn't it, Alistair, where there was this 24-hour break which allowed the whole invasion to happen.
But it was always extremely windy, and it seems that it's, although probably windy for you, Tim, it just seems a little less windy than it was earlier on, am I right?
It is. Yesterday was a fabulous day, beautiful weather, very sunny, and today we woke up and it was about 4:30 actually when we woke up, but it was pretty bad then. By dawn, it had more or less clear, but down at Pointe du Hoc and the American ceremony, they were in high winds and rain, and here it was drizzling, it was overcast, and it really was quite cold with a very stiff breeze. And as we've gone through the afternoon, yes, it has brightened up. In fact, the sun just trying to come through the clouds now. 6 o'clock here, but you get very, very long summer evenings in this part of the world. It doesn't get dark till about 10 o'clock tonight, by which time the Queen will have journeyed along the coast. I believe she's dining tonight at the chateau and then going back onto the royal yacht. Finally, time while we're waiting for the next ceremony to start to mention a forgotten man, really. Perhaps the military historians know him well. A man called Major General Sir Percy Hobart, and his machines were called the Hobart Funnies, and they were the tanks, the duplex drive, the swimming tank, which the Germans didn't know the Allies had, and they didn't know what was coming towards them until they came out of the sea, dropped the inflatable skirts they had around the metal, and suddenly started firing, and the Germans realized tanks had swum ashore. And he had a lot of other tricks up his sleeve. Major General Sir Percy Hobart was not highly regarded by the War Office in the 30s. He was pensioned off. He was serving as a corporal in the Home Guard when Sir Winston Churchill, at the time, Winston Churchill, sort of saved him, saved his career, brought him in and said, create some things which will cause havoc amongst the Germans, and he did just that. Perhaps Alistair can tell us about the other inventions that he came up with.
Well, I'm not specifically well briefed on that one, Tim. Thanks a lot, but...
Well, I beg your pardon. I'll tell you about them then.
But perhaps I was just actually thinking, Alistair, that, you know, what we would have been well over 12 hours into D-Day at this time.
Yes.
At what stage would the forces that were amassed on that beach have been at this time?
Well, I think that they were well established now at the far end of the beach, and they had predominantly got rid of the first line of defense, and they were well now, probably about 9 miles in. About sunrise, they were about 9 miles in. They still had yet to capture the town locations that they'd been set, but that wasn't far off. They landed, as we all know, with luckily not too many casualties, unlike the appalling mess and carnage of Omaha, and were able to push ahead and at least give the reassurance that Montgomery needed that everything was going relatively well.
The time is 5 o'clock. If you've just joined us, we are on Gold Beach at Arromanches in Normandy, where the Queen, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, Prince Andrew have been meeting veterans. The Queen has addressed the veterans this afternoon, the hundreds of British veterans that have turned out here, and paraded along the beach. The Queen has thanked them for their heroic efforts on D-Day. This, a day of emotion for the veterans here, the sights and the sounds triggering vivid flashbacks of the horror on these beaches when thousands lay dead, 6,500 lay dead after the first day of combat. Memories of that day rekindled for millions today. Tears, great sadness mixed with the knowledge that the cause was a just one and that the Nazi tyranny was well on the way to being removed from Europe. There will be more of the D-Day celebrations here in Normandy in Live at 5 in a few moments' time.
There's a reenactment here before coverage short.
Staying with our coverage here, we're watching the flags as the tide comes in on Gold Beach.
It might be of interest to look at the Royal Standard, which has the 3 lions of England, the lion rampant of Scotland and the harp of Ireland. But the coat of arms that belonged to the Duke of Normandy were the 2 lions rampant, from which the 3 were developed for England when William the Conqueror came across. And of course, one of the places that was captured by the expeditionary force as they landed was to regain Caen. And in a way, I should imagine the Queen will reflect upon this, because her ancestor and the first of the Norman kings of Great Britain is buried there, and it was a significant achievement to regain that, one of our king's souls, back as part of the push to gain a foothold on the Norman beaches that were once, after all, ruled by the Queen's ancestors.
So, more coverage of the D-Day commemoration in a moment, on the day that generations remember the sacrifice made on the Normandy beaches 50 years ago.
On the beaches.
Personal memories for the Queen, her tribute to the thousands who died.
Can a Chinese airliner crash?
Let us remember before God and commend to his safekeeping those who laid down their lives in the cause of freedom, justice, and peace.
At the end of the service, hundreds actually moved on to look at some of the 4,000 British graves in the cemetery. Later at Omaha Beach, where so many Allied troops died, the Queen joined Presidents Mitterrand and Clinton and heads of state from around the world to honour the fallen and the survivors. Standard bearers carried the flags of the Allied nations onto the beach. The patrol of France performed a flypast, trailing the colours of the French tricolour, and veterans spoke of their memories of D-Day.
3 days. I must say that when we see the flags come down, that will be, as it were, the conclusion of all that this has been culminating to. But I think we've had the most emotional moments as all the people who it's all about, the veterans, marched past Her Majesty the Queen to the sound of the wartime songs and a lot of jollity in the air as we recall that apart from all the reflection that took place in the cemeteries, this is also the celebration of life, the celebration of freedom.
Our correspondent who has been witnessing events firsthand, as it were, over there in Arromanches all day is Tim Marshall. Tim, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Let us soak up a bit of the atmosphere. Tell us what's going on at the moment.
Well, what we're waiting for is the Queen to finish her walkabout, which is among the veterans who are in wheelchairs. They couldn't make it down onto the beach for obvious reasons. When she's finished that, there'll be one of 2 things, either an amphibious landing of the various standards, various flags of battle and different organisations, or if that was not going to take place, we'll go straight to the sunset ceremony, the sunset service, where the parachute regiment will play the national anthems of France and Britain, followed by, RAF trumpeters, who will, as you see, are standing by there to take part in that ceremony. As for the flavour of the day, it's been a wonderful day, both moving and fun. And I know the Queen had a truly wonderful time. She was quite moved on the platform as she watched the march past by the thousands of veterans who took part in the D-Day Normandy landings. And at the same time, she also enjoyed herself singing along to the great old songs that Everybody knows it's a long way to Tipperary and things like that. Earlier in the day, the veterans had been in the bars and the restaurants alongside the current serving soldiers, chatting with them, talking over the different events of their lives. And before that, we had the very moving ceremony at Baia for the British, at Omaha for the Americans, and down actually on Omaha Beach as an international ceremony. It's been quite a week, it's been quite a day, and the Queen, I think, very pleased to be here. And this is the Veterans' Day, and they seemed extremely pleased to see her.
Indeed, Simon McCoy, they surged forward to surround her at the Bayeux Cemetery, didn't they?
Yes, and I think the Duke of Edinburgh caught him unawares, and he wasn't terribly happy, but I think the Queen felt that this was really what it was all about. She was out here to meet the veterans, to take part in a commemorative weekend with them. Whilst a lot of people see the royal family as the focus of events, it really was the veterans. And as they prepare to leave now, the Queen has had a day starting off with remembering those who died. And here at Arromanches, you saw her singing to the music, they're wiping away the odd tear, enjoying the day with the veterans who remember her, and particularly the role of her mother, now the Queen Mother, during those war years. Queen Elizabeth, King George VI played a vital role, and the royal family figurehead then and once again today.
As the band of the Parachute Regiment plays, there's a reminder in this picture of why 1.7 million British men had to come across the sea into Normandy. That is Simone Weil, who was just next to the Queen there. She is a survivor of the Auschwitz camp. Auschwitz, perhaps one of the main reminders of the tyranny that was in Europe. As you can see, the flags are being lowered, the tricolour there on the left, the Union flag, and in the centre, the Royal Standard. This is Sunset Call by the RAF trumpeters.
This is the naval sunset ceremony. Normally the white ensign is lowered on every naval battleship at sunset to this well-known tune, and every naval man listening will recognise it, as indeed Admiral of the Fleet, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh does from his years at sea. But today the flags being brought down are more representative than only the Navy. They include all the people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and the people of the Republic of France.
Flag lowering ceremony, if I could just turn to you, Alistair Bruce. You mentioned earlier the overall feeling of gaiety, almost of celebration of life. But before all this occurred, there was some concern that there would be a feeling of too much triumphalism and not enough poignancy about all those people who died. Do you think they got the tone right in the end?
Do you know, it must be the most diplomatically difficult area to deal with. If you want to reflect upon something as magnificent, as heroic, and yet as horrific and tragic as we've been reflecting on over the last 3 years, how do you do it? How do you get it right? I think that everyone has tried remarkably hard to get the atmosphere right. And in the end, if you look at the faces of the veterans during this weekend, we've seen them in tears for the memories of their friends, and we've seen them delighted by the reunion of the moment. I think they've got it right.
Also, arriving back on the beaches, some of them for the first time since 1944, they talked about the flashback, the moment of remembering what it was like when they stepped off those landing craft, and remembering the fear as the shots rained down from above, from the German bunkers. For a lot of them, perhaps the pride was overtaken by a memory of that sheer fright of the occasion.
I should imagine all of them were remembering it very clearly, but you know, in the wonderfully clean and sanitized almost ceremonial that we've watched, it must have been difficult for them to recreate around themselves the horror and shock of what was going on. The the guns going off, the sound of the aircraft, the explosions going off around them, the fear of mines, the fear of being shot, just the sound of whistling metal and everything in the air. It's impossible for even the men with such a memory, I would have thought, to be able to recall it accurately and clearly. But what they will never forget is the pain of losing their friends, I'm sure.
Simon McCoy, events drawing to a close now for the Queen.
That's right. We saw the Sovereign Standard waving there in the wind. That will be lowered as soon as the Queen has left the scene, and as we can see there, she's preparing to leave. At the end of what has been a day for her of memories of a nation's fight, of the fight of the veterans, and more personally of the fight that was waged by the royal family, by her father, King George VI, her mother, now the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth, and her own small part. She was an officer in the Auxiliary Transport Service towards the end of the war.
We always associate the Queen Mother really with war memories, but Her Majesty indeed played a significant part in morale boosting, didn't she, during the war?
Very much so. She made several broadcasts on the BBC to Western Europe. She was 14 when the war started, 18 when it finished, and as she leaves, the Sovereign Standard will be lowered as she heads back to Britannia.
What memories do you think she'll be taking with her of the day, Simon?
I suspect the most moving for her were when we saw her with the veterans as they marched past. I'm sure we all saw her wiping away a tear, and then within minutes she was tapping her feet and swinging to the music. It was a day of incredibly mixed emotions, as I think Alistair was saying earlier on. We started off remembering those who died, very solemn services at the cemeteries, and towards the end we were joining the veterans in celebrating their return, the fact that they survived, but at all times not forgetting those who died. As Alistair said, I think they got it absolutely right. It was a very mixed day, but a day when people were crying for various reasons. Personal reasons, reasons remembering family who didn't come back, and tears of joy too. A great day, a momentous day, and the Queen knew that, I think.
A sombre but successful day?
Yes, a sombre but successful day indeed. I wonder if by any chance I could just put the day into perspective. I mean, on the 6th of June, and I'd like to show some maps here, on the 6th of June, we can see the first achievement. The red shows exactly how far the Allies got in getting their foothold on Normandy. By the 30th of June, they'd gone that much further in, and they had Cherbourg Peninsula almost entirely under their control, and they were securing the beachhead from which they could push further forward. By the 1st of August, they had moved further down and created the whole triangle, as it were, of that Cherbourg corner. And by the 15th of August, there was just a small bit around the Flers that was still difficult for them to grasp. But I mean, on the 15th of August, basically, Overlord had been achieved. And it was done at a great expense, but the tremendous achievement of all those veterans who we saw today.
I heard one person who took part in the D-Day landings as an ordinary soldier, who became a war correspondent later after the war. And he was slightly critical of the events today because it hadn't paid enough attention to the feelings of the French people, particularly in the city of Caen, who underwent a severe bombing from the RAF, which the RAF, the Allies, considered necessary because of the importance to follow up the initial attack. And he felt that the 5,000 French died in those bombing attacks. He felt that that hadn't been significantly brought out in today's ceremonial.
Well, of course it's... well, I'm not sure it wasn't brought out. I mean, we've recalled all the French who were killed. But, I mean, if he felt that, then we must be sensitive to it. But, I mean, what do? You've got to establish a bridgehead. I'm afraid modern warfare, even today, can't be particular about who it blows up. Once you press the button or pull the trigger, off it goes. And if you have to establish a bridgehead to free Europe, then imagine the weight of responsibility on Eisenhower's shoulders. He knew he was going to have to send a great number of the people of Caen to their graves. And I should imagine, and indeed many of those commanders felt it right until their own death, the responsibility. I mean, shots of Montgomery as he visited the scenes of the battles that he had commanded, burdened down with the responsibility. I mean, it must have been terribly difficult. And if the people who organised these marking ceremonies have in some way missed somebody out, well, I think we should all be very sorry for them, but hope that next time, if there is a next time, we can get it right for them.
On that note, Alice Bruce, thanks very much for the moment.
Thank you.
Well, just a few moments ago, we saw the last standard lowered, and we have some film to show you now. That just a few moments ago here on Sky News. A day that was sombre but successful, emotive and enchanting. The D-Day commemorations here on Sky News. Just left to thank our royal correspondent Simon McCoy, Alistair Bruce, our ceremonial expert, and out there at Arromanches, Tim Marshall, who has been with us throughout the day. Gentlemen, thank you all for bringing us the D-Day commemorations in such graphic detail. We appreciate it from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now let's shift focus, because Germany stood quietly to one side today as the wartime allies remembered the events of 50 years ago. Chancellor Kohl spoke for many when he said Germany hadn't wanted an invitation to the events in Normandy because it would have been inappropriate. But many younger people hope that one day Germany will be welcome, because D-Day was the start of their liberation from the Nazis.
Germany's mixed emotions about the war were on full display today. Newspapers marked the anniversary of the D-Day landings with headlines saying D-Day remembrances on both sides of the Channel, and the Allies land, Hitler sleeps, and Berlin is starving. On the streets of modern-day Berlin, people agreed that Germany should not have been invited to the celebrations in Normandy, but some were sorry that Germany wasn't remembered.
Yes, I think they should be there, but we also have to respect the feelings of people who've taken part in the invasion then, and who remember Germans as soldiers as they were then. It's the right of the allies, of the former allies, to say, okay, we don't want to have Germany with us right now, but I don't think it's a good thing for the future.
I think that it was an act of liberation, huh? Is this the right word? And I think it is good that we are remembered.
Far from the moving ceremonies in Normandy as the Allies remembered D-Day, many Germans marked the day quietly. They have their own memories of the war, many visiting Berlin's memorial to all victims of tyranny. The overwhelming feeling was that the Allied victory brought Germany what it most wanted, an end to the Hitler years. Simon Gilliott, Sky News.